Tonight on RFL, we're going to break from our typical format of focusing solely on the events of the day. And instead, we take a look back in time, 80 years ago in the past to be exact. This as we air the Oscar-nominated short-form documentary, A Night at the Garden, taking you inside the old Madison Square Garden, where 20,000 Americans gathered for a pro-Nazi rally in February of 1939. It is a scene. Nazi swastika and salutes under a giant picture of George Washington and a film that is almost impossible to believe. Now we're going to be focusing on this rally and this film for one very simple reason, because those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it, if that is, we're not already, in some small ways, repeating it. We are, after all, living through an era where white nationalists not only feel newly empowered, but marched and murdered to defend symbols of white hatred in Charlottesville and elsewhere, where those same white nationalists marched through the streets in a Nazi-like progression, denigrating people of color and Jews, in a scene reminiscent of Berlin in the 1940s. And all as the nation's leader, who has stoked that nationalism and pitted American against American, provided cover for those nationalists, calling some of them good people, and whose supporters, few of whom would call themselves white nationalists, cheer and chant in unison hate-filled slogans aimed at separating so-called real Americans from outsiders, who they're told are responsible for all of their and the nation's problems. All this as we see spikes in anti-Semitic and other hate-based attacks across this country, and where the symbol of their political leaders' movement has itself become a symbol of hate, a symbol so powerful even people lying about what they claim were hate crimes, including those in false descriptions. Again, we will air the Oscar-nominated short story documentary, A Night at the Garden, in its entirety in just a moment. But we wanted to first provide some context for the film and our decision to air it. And to do that, I spoke earlier today with Marshall Curry. Marshall is the director, producer, and editor of the film. Congratulations on the nomination, Marshall. After seeing it, very well deserved.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
You know, I think I have a pretty good grasp on history. I had no idea this ever took place, and I hardly think I'm in the minority here. You yourself was shocked. You saw a clip here or there, but you had no idea. This happened in New York City in 1939. 20,000 people filled MSG to capacity. And as we're going to show here, you have Nazi flags basically paralleling George Washington and the American flag. And this happened in New York City.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I had never heard about it, and almost nobody who's seen the film or who I've talked to had heard about it. But it's a part of our history that we need to face, and you know, things like this that are part of our past, and in order to keep ourselves from falling into similar traps, we need to understand how vulnerable we are to terrible leaders and terrible ideas.
I want to get to the content of it, but one process question. You chose to let the video basically play for what it was. The effect, at least for me watching it, it was chilling. Was that the intent, just to shock people that this was not some made-up dystopian film? This thing really happened?
Yeah, I mean, it feels when you see it like it's an episode of Man in the High Castle or, you know, a Twilight Zone or something, to think that 80 years ago, 20,000 Americans, New Yorkers, a modern, you know, progressive city, even in 1939, could come together to celebrate the rise of Nazism. And when I first came across this footage, I considered making a more traditional documentary where you would interview historians and give a little bit more background. But I found that there was a real cinematic power to just dropping the audience into this world and letting them experience this rally without voiceover, without analysis, but just to let them see what happened that night and try to make sense of it and ask, how could something like this have happened in America?
And one of the things, at least for me, Marshall, that jumps out is, as disturbing as Charlottesville was, you could at least rationalize to yourself, well, you had a bunch of kooks contained here with tiki torches. They panned the crowd. You have people in suits. You have women in, you know, fine dresses here. These could have been people's neighbors and were people's neighbors. And this is, like I said, in the middle of New York City at the world's greatest arena. Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what really jumped out at me when I saw the footage was the reaction of the crowd. I think we all know that there are bad leaders in the world who would try to stir us up against each other. But when you see how complacent the crowd was, how they seemed to enjoy and cheer and laugh at things that were being said and done from the stage. You know, the leader comes out and he begins by attacking the press and he attacks minorities and then a protester runs out on stage and is beaten up while this crowd of people who, you know, I'm a New Yorker, I live in New York, these 20,000 people would be my neighbors, and to see them laugh and cheer and applaud as somebody was being dehumanized, a group of people who would be murdered by the millions in the next few years. It was chilling, and it says something about human nature that I think we need to be careful of. We need to be vigilant about the way that we get stirred up against each other.
In fact, that person has a name, Isidore Greenbaum, and talk about not just what happened to him, as people will see on the stage, but also what happened when he went before a judge and that exchange.
Yeah. So Isidore Greenbaum was a Jewish plumber's assistant from Brooklyn who went to the rally that night. He had heard about this group and he wanted to see for himself what was going on. He was so shocked and appalled by the hate, the anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, anti-minority of any kind rhetoric that was happening on stage, that he decided to run out. And when he did, he was beaten up, his pants were ripped off, he was thrown off stage and was arrested. We've been in touch with his grandson. Interestingly, he ended up joining the military and being a part of the American military during World War II. But that night, he was arrested. The next day, he was brought before a judge and charged $25 fine for disturbing the peace. The judge said to him, "Don't you realize that someone could have been hurt by what you did on stage that night?" And he replied, "Don't you realize that someone's going to be hurt by what was being said on stage that night?" And you know, of course, this is 1939, so in the next few years, millions and millions of people would be murdered by ideologies like this.
In fact, as you say, when this event was going on, Hitler was in the process of building his 6th concentration camp and was months away from invading Poland. Finally, I don't think it's lost on folks the parallels and the echoes that you see to today. That was not by accident, right, Marshall?
No, I mean, as soon as I saw the footage, it felt very surreal and distant, but it also felt unsettlingly familiar. We see a leader attack the press, attack minorities, cheer violence against protesters. These are all things that are the First Amendment of our Constitution is respect for the press, respect for minority religions, and respect for people's rights to speak up. And so I wanted people to say, hey, look what happened in 1939 when our leaders did this. Look at the catastrophe that followed. We need to be careful and vigilant about protecting American values against this kind of demagoguery today.
And to me, Marshall, at least the thing that's always scared me the most is if there was someone that wasn't as ham-handed and obvious as the president is, and someone who's more nuanced but had the same goals of dividing this country, they could play off of world events and off of national insecurities. And this kind of a thing, while it seems foreign and from generations ago and never to happen again, my fear is something like this could take place with somebody that had more subtlety than what we've seen for the last 2 years.
I think that's right. I mean, we are seeing around the world demagogues like this rising up in many countries and stirring people up against their neighbors. I mean, this president that we have ran for office explicitly saying that he was going to ban people from a certain religious group from being allowed into our country. You know, a total and complete ban was his quote. And it is frightening to think about how vulnerable Americans are, even Americans are, to this kind of divisive and hateful rhetoric.
Well, if the idea was to shock the conscience, I think you did that and then some, and I certainly think it causes people to think, which I know at the end of the day is the goal of every documentarian. Marshall, I appreciate it, and again, we're going to be showing it to our audience here shortly. Thank you again for the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And of course, if people want to learn more about the event or share it with people online, the URL is annightatthegarden.com. The movie's called A Night at the Garden. So it's a 7-minute film and easy to share with people. And
we've got that URL at the bottom of our screen, and they'll be able to see that as well throughout the entirety of the play of it. Marshall, again, congratulations on the Academy nom and again on this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We will take a quick break, and when we return, we'll air Marshall Curry's documentary in its entirety as we spotlight what happened then, and if we're not careful, what could happen today when hate rises in America.